The scent of caramelized sugar hung heavy in the air that morning. It was a rare occurrence. My stepmother, Diane, wasn't one for elaborate displays, especially in the kitchen. Yet there it was, a meticulously frosted lemon cake sitting on the dining table. My 18th birthday. A milestone, I suppose, but one I'd always approached with a strange sense of detachment. The day unfolded with an unsettling quiet. Even the usual morning bickering between myself and my stepbrother, Kevin, was absent. A heavy stillness had settled over the house, a stillness that made the hairs on the back of my neck prickle. By the time late afternoon arrived, I was still lounging in my oldest, most comfortable pajamas, a faded band t-shirt, when my stepfather, Robert, called me into the living room. He sat stiffly on his armchair, his gaze fixed anywhere but on me. Diane was beside him on the sofa, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her lips pressed into a thin, pale line. Something was undeniably wrong. My stomach churned with a knot of unease. I'd learned over the years, through unspoken cues and carefully calibrated reactions, to bury my emotions deep. Displays of vulnerability were discouraged. "Sit down, Alana." Robert's voice was devoid of warmth, echoing the same icy tone he reserved for reprimanding childhood mishaps. I obeyed, sinking into the worn armchair opposite them, a knot of apprehension tightening in my chest. Then the bomb dropped. "You're adopted, Alana," Diane stated, her voice flat, devoid of any inflection. No preamble, no softening of the blow, just the bare, brutal truth. "We took you in when you were almost 2 years old." Robert added his piece, his voice equally devoid of emotion. "Your birth mother, she wasn't able to provide for you. We offered you a home, a life." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. My mind raced, trying to reconcile this new reality with the memories, the experiences, the entire foundation of my life. I was adopted? The woman I'd known as my mother, the man I'd called father, they weren't my parents? But there was more. An undercurrent, a subtle shift in their demeanor, a sense of finality. "We believe it's time," Diane continued, her gaze still fixed on her lap, "for you to start your own path. You're 18 now, a legal adult." Robert leaned down, reaching under the couch, and slid a battered duffel bag across the floor towards me. It landed with a soft thud at my feet. "There's some money inside," he said, "and a few changes of clothes. We've arranged for you to stay at a hostel until you find a job." They were turning me out. On my 18th birthday. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. A wave of conflicting emotions threatened to overwhelm me. Disbelief, hurt, anger. But years of practice kicked in. I swallowed the lump in my throat, forcing my face to remain impassive. I rose slowly to my feet, my fingers curling tightly around the strap of the duffel bag. "Thank you," I managed to say, my voice steady despite the turmoil within. A small, tight smile stretched across my lips. They didn't seem to notice the tremor in my hands, the flash of something hard and resolute in my eyes. Because what they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly have imagined, was that 3 weeks prior, I had stumbled upon a secret. A secret hidden in the dusty recesses of the hallway cabinet. It was a letter tucked away behind a stack of old tax documents. An envelope addressed to a woman named Serafina Valerius. My fingers trembled as I opened it, my heart pounding in my chest. Inside was a birth certificate. My birth certificate. My name was there, Alana, but the name listed as my mother was Serafina Valerius. No father was named. Curiosity, a relentless need to know, had driven me to seek out more. I'd spent hours online, scouring the internet for any trace of Serafina. I'd even ventured to the local library, losing myself in the dusty archives of old newspapers. What I discovered, it shook me to my core. So, as I walked out the front door of the house I'd always known as home, I didn't feel the crushing weight of abandonment. Instead, a strange sense of purpose filled me. I wasn't leaving in defeat. I was leaving with a plan. The hostel was a grim, transient place. The air hung heavy with the scent of stale bleach and despair. It was the kind of place people ended up when they had nowhere else to go. I hugged my duffel bag close that first night. Its meager contents: 2 sets of worn clothes, a handful of crumpled bills, and the precious envelope, my only possessions. But the envelope, it held the key. The next morning, I slipped out before the first hint of dawn painted the sky. The air was crisp and biting against my skin. I walked for what felt like hours, the city slowly waking around me, until I reached the public library. It was my sanctuary, a place of quiet refuge. And it held the archives. I found a quiet corner at the microfilm station, my heart pounding in my chest as I slid the reel I'd hidden in my locker the previous week. The yellowed article flickered onto the screen, and I read it again and again, as if by sheer force of will, I could change the ending. Local psychiatrist, Serafina Valerius, institutionalized after whistleblower claims backfire. The accompanying photo showed a young woman, Serafina, with dark, intense eyes and delicate features, being led away in handcuffs. Her expression wasn't one of fear, but of defiance. The article detailed how Serafina had accused a prominent local doctor, Dr. Alistair Caldwell, of abuse and unethical experimentation on female patients at a clinic that had since been shut down. Dr. Caldwell, of course, denied all allegations. A month later, Serafina was declared mentally unstable and committed to a psychiatric facility, Silverwood Asylum, for treatment and observation. No charges were filed against Dr. Caldwell. There was no follow-up. Just silence. Except, Dr. Caldwell later became the head of the Caldwell Wellness Foundation, a foundation my stepfather had donated to quite frequently. I remembered seeing the name on letters scattered around his study, always dismissed as charity work. Now, the pieces were beginning to fit together, forming a disturbing picture. I printed the article, my hands trembling slightly, and carefully tucked it into the envelope. The librarian gave me an odd look, perhaps noticing my agitation. Back at the hostel, I pulled out a worn notebook and began to piece together the fragments of the puzzle. Serafina was a psychiatrist. She was institutionalized after attempting to expose a powerful man. She gave birth to me during that time. Somehow, I ended up in the care of a couple connected to that same man. It couldn't be a coincidence. Sleep eluded me that night. The shadows in the cramped room seemed to dance and whisper, too alive, too close. My mind was consumed by thoughts of Serafina. Was she still alive? Did she even know I existed? I needed answers. I needed to see her, to speak to her if I could. But first, I had to find Silverwood Asylum, if it still existed. The following morning, I began my search. I called countless public records offices, mental health departments, anyone who might have information about the asylum or where its former patients were transferred. Most had never even heard of Silverwood. But one clerk, an older woman with a kind voice, hesitated when I asked. She promised to call me back. 2 agonizing hours later, my phone rang. "There's a long-term care facility in Oakhaven, about a 3-hour drive north," she said softly. Some of the Silverwood patients were quietly moved there in the late 90s. No public record, but some of them are still there. I didn't ask how she knew. I simply wrote down the name, Oakhaven Behavioral Center. I had a destination. But I had no car, no money, and no idea what I would find when I got there. I hadn't eaten in over a day, not from lack of hunger, but from lack of funds. The meager amount of money my step-parents had given me was nearly gone, swallowed up by hostel fees and the cost of printing records. Every single coin was precious. I found myself sitting on a cracked sidewalk near the library, my notebook open in my lap, desperately trying to calculate bus fares. Oakhaven was only a few hours away, but with my dwindling funds, it might as well have been on another planet. I didn't want to resort to theft. I didn't want to beg. But I needed answers. Across the street, a small diner had a help wanted sign in the window. Hesitantly, I crossed the street and went inside. I spoke to the manager, a gruff but fair-looking man, and offered to do any job he had. Dishwashing, cleaning, anything. He studied me for a moment, his eyes lingering on the dark circles under mine, then said, "You start tomorrow, 6 a.m. I worked tirelessly for 5 days, barely exchanging a word with anyone. My back ached, My hands were raw and bleeding from the harsh soap and scalding water, but with each shift, my determination grew stronger. On the sixth morning, I had $117 in cash and tips tucked safely in my pocket. It was enough. The bus to Oakhaven left at 10:40 a.m. I slipped out of the hostel without saying goodbye to anyone, the envelope containing Serafina's article tucked securely inside my jacket. The journey was long and quiet, the bus winding its way through desolate towns, their streets still glazed with frost despite it being April. Oakhaven Behavioral Center sat atop a long, winding hill, partially obscured by a thick grove of trees. The sign was faded, the paint peeling away, making it look less like a medical facility and more like a forgotten, haunted mansion. The receptionist barely glanced up when I entered. She was a middle-aged woman with a severe bun, glasses perched low on her nose, and a voice that sounded perpetually weary. "I'm here to visit a patient," I said, trying to project an air of confidence I didn't quite feel. "Name?" she asked, her eyes still glued to her clipboard. "Serafina Valerius." She finally looked up, her gaze lingering on me for a moment, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. "She doesn't receive visitors." "I know," I replied, my voice firm. "That's why I'm here." She picked up the phone, dialed a short number, and spoke in hushed tones, too low for me to decipher. Then, she nodded curtly in my direction. "Down the hallway, second door on the left. But keep it brief." The hallway was long and dimly lit, the air thick with the smell of antiseptic and something else, something indefinable, yet unsettling. The second door on the left creaked open like something out of a nightmare. And there she was, Serafina. She sat by a large window, her frame thin and frail, her hair streaked with gray, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She didn't turn as I entered the room. "Serafina?" I said, my voice trembling despite my best efforts. Slowly, she turned her head. Her eyes met mine, and for a fleeting moment, I saw something flicker within them, a spark of recognition, a shadow of pain, or perhaps both. She didn't speak, but she didn't look away either. I stepped closer, my heart pounding against my ribs. "My name is Alana. You had a daughter 18 years ago. They told me you were unfit. They said you were dangerous. But I've read the articles. I know what you tried to do. I know what they did to you." She exhaled softly, a faint whisper of air. Her hands clenched in her lap, her posture shifting slightly. "They still watch me," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "They think I don't remember. But I do." I froze. She remembered. But who was they? Serafina's eyes darted nervously towards the door, then scanned the corners of the ceiling. I saw no cameras, but she stared as if she knew exactly where they had been, or perhaps still were. Her voice was barely a breath as she spoke again. "They recorded our therapy sessions. They said it was for research, but it wasn't. It was to control us, to build profiles. I saw things, heard things I shouldn't have." She paused, her thin fingers gripping her wrist tightly, as if trying to restrain herself. "Serafina," I began, taking another step closer, my voice pleading. "Who is they? Is it the Caldwell Foundation? My stepfather?" She blinked rapidly, the name seeming to elicit a physical reaction. She shook her head slowly, not as a denial, but as if trying to dispel a terrifying image. Your stepfather," she whispered, her eyes avoiding mine. "He wasn't supposed to adopt you. He wasn't even on the approved list. But he pulled strings. Got your file closed, sealed. I tried to stop it, but by then they had already decided I was too disruptive." My knees felt weak. I sank into the chair beside her, struggling to keep my voice steady. "What were they doing, Serafina? What did Caldwell do to those women?" She bit her lip until it turned white, her eyes filled with a haunting sadness. "Experimental therapy, isolation techniques, memory suppression trials. It started under the guise of PTSD treatment, but it evolved. They tested drugs, behavioral manipulation on women no one would miss. Some were addicts, some were just inconvenient wives." "And you?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I was documenting everything. I was young, idealistic. I thought ethics mattered. I submitted a report to the state board. A week later, I was suspended, then arrested, then this place. Her voice cracked, and tears welled in her eyes. It was clear she hadn't allowed herself the luxury of tears in a very long time. I begged them to let me see you when they told me you'd been placed, she continued, her voice thick with emotion. I didn't know where or with whom. They moved me here, said I was a danger to myself. I never stopped wondering. I reached into my bag and pulled out the envelope, gently placing it in her trembling hands. You don't have to wonder anymore. She touched the folded papers as if they might disintegrate at her touch. For a long moment, she remained silent, her gaze fixed on the envelope. Then, she looked up at me, her eyes filled with a desperate plea. You shouldn't be here. If they know you found me, I don't care. I interrupted, my voice firm. You're not crazy. You never were. And I'm going to prove it. Serafina's hand shot out, her fingers gripping mine with surprising strength. Don't trust anyone with a badge or a lab coat. Not in this world. Suddenly, footsteps echoed in the hallway outside. Serafina's entire body tensed, her eyes darting towards the door. A shadow passed across the small window in the door. She straightened up, her eyes becoming distant, her posture rigid, almost unnatural. The nurse from the front desk opened the door, a thin, artificial smile plastered on her face. I'm sorry, visiting hours are over. Serafina didn't look at me again. She simply folded her hands in her lap and turned her gaze back to the window, the spark of recognition and connection extinguished as quickly as it had appeared. My heart raced as I walked past the nurse in the hallway. She leaned in slightly, her voice barely a whisper. You're not the first to come asking about her. But the last girl, she didn't come back. She closed the door behind me before I could respond, her words hanging in the air like a chilling premonition. Sources and related content. The cold air hit me like a physical blow the moment I stepped outside of Oakhaven Behavioral Center. My breath fogged in front of me, and my fingertips throbbed, not just from the lingering chill, but from the weight of everything I had just learned. My mother wasn't a patient. She was a prisoner. I didn't head straight back to the bus stop. Instead, I found a weathered bench beneath a gnarled, lifeless oak tree and sat there, my gaze fixed on the faded sign of the facility looming on the hill above. My thoughts raced, a chaotic jumble of questions and fears. Another girl had come before me. Someone else had dared to seek the truth, and she had vanished. The nurse's words echoed in my mind, not as a casual observation, but as a chilling warning. I returned to Oakhaven, but not to the center. I found a dingy motel on the outskirts of town, its walls adorned with peeling wallpaper, the air thick with the smell of mildew, and a lock on the door that barely offered a semblance of security. Sleep was a distant luxury that night. I spent the hours combing through online forums, delving into the murky depths of internet archives, even scouring obscure Reddit threads, desperately seeking any shred of information about Oakhaven, Silverwood, or any patients who had mysteriously disappeared. My search yielded nothing. It was as if their history had been meticulously erased, scrubbed clean from the records. Frustration gnawed at me, but I refused to be deterred. I shifted my focus to the Caldwell Wellness Foundation. The name had been burned into my memory since I first saw it on those donation letters in Robert's study. Their website was a polished facade, filled with stock photos of smiling faces, serene landscapes, and carefully crafted mission statements about providing holistic healing for women in crisis. It was a lie, a carefully constructed front to conceal the darkness beneath. I began to dig through nonprofit filings, tax documents, anything that was publicly accessible. And then I found it, a name, buried deep within the administrative paperwork. Thomas Brenner. He had signed off on a foundation acquisition of patient care research materials during the year Silverwood was shuttered. My stomach dropped. That was Robert's real name. He wasn't just a donor, a passive supporter. He was an integral part of it, a director, one of the inner circle. He had helped Caldwell cover it all up. He may have even played a role in having Serafina committed. and then he took me in. I was never a gift, never a charitable act. I was a trophy, a souvenir from their success, proof that their system worked, that they could destroy someone's life and raise their child as if nothing had happened. A wave of fury washed over me, but beneath it, a cold tendril of fear snaked its way into my heart. They had power, influence, reach. They had erased others before. That nurse at Oakhaven hadn't been offering a friendly warning. She was telling me to run, to save myself. But I wouldn't run. Not yet. I needed proof, irrefutable evidence to expose their crimes. I scoured public employee records for Oakhaven and found a name, Nurse Ingrid Meyer. The same name I'd seen on the name tag at the center. With considerable effort, I managed to track down her Facebook page. It was mostly devoid of personal posts, filled with generic shares and photos of her cat. But there was one clue, a breadcrumb of hope, an old comment under a picture from a nursing conference. Someone had tagged her and written, "Still working nights at Oakhaven? Poor thing, that place is practically haunted." I sent her a message, my fingers trembling as I typed. I told her who I was, that I had spoken with Serafina, and that I desperately needed her help to bring the truth to light. Hours ticked by, each second stretching into an eternity. I received no response, and doubt began to creep in. Perhaps it was a dead end. Then, at 2:14 a.m., my phone buzzed with a notification. A message from Ingrid. "Meet me at the back entrance tomorrow night, midnight. But if anyone sees you, pretend you're lost." The wind was relentless that night, biting through my thin jacket as if it were made of paper. Midnight at Oakhaven felt different, charged with a palpable sense of dread. It was as if the building itself was holding its breath, anticipating something. There were no cars in the parking lot, no sounds of life, only an eerie silence and long, distorted shadows stretching under the pale moonlight. I followed the winding gravel path around to the back of the building, carefully stepping over cracked stones and patches of frost that clung stubbornly to the ground. The door, marked "Maintenance Only," creaked open before I could even knock. Ingrid Meyer stood in the doorway, her figure silhouetted against the dim light inside. She was still wearing her scrubs, her face etched with a mixture of exhaustion and apprehension. Up close, she appeared older than I had initially thought, not in years, but in the weight she carried, as if she had been burdened with too many secrets for too long. "You came," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, my resolve hardening. I had to. She gestured for me to come inside, her eyes darting nervously around. "Keep your voice down. Some of the cameras are broken, but not all." We moved quickly through a labyrinth of narrow service hallways, lit by flickering fluorescent bulbs that cast long, dancing shadows on the walls. She led me through a small, cluttered break room and into an old, musty records room, its shelves lined with rows upon rows of dusty filing cabinets. "I shouldn't be doing this," Ingrid whispered, her hands trembling slightly as she unlocked the third drawer from the bottom with a small, tarnished brass key. "But I saw what they did to your mother, and to the others. And when that last girl showed up, I thought, maybe, just maybe, someone would finally listen." I froze, my breath catching in my throat. "The other girl? What happened to her?" Ingrid pulled a thick file from the cabinet and handed it to me. The file was worn and dog-eared, its edges softened from years of handling. Her name was Kasia Ramirez. She was a journalism student, bright, persistent. She came here asking questions, just like you, about Serafina and others who had vanished from Silverwood. She showed me court documents she had unearthed, medical records she had painstakingly pieced together. She was getting close to the truth. My heart pounded in my chest. "What happened to her?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Ingrid's gaze was haunted. She came back for a second visit. That night, her dorm room was broken into. Her laptop and all her files were gone. She told her roommate she felt like she was being followed, watched. 2 days later, she disappeared. The police ruled it a voluntary disappearance, but she trailed off, her expression conveying the unspoken truth. "You don't believe that?" I finished for her. "No," Ingrid said softly, her voice filled with a quiet certainty. Kasia was scared, but not the running kind. I opened Serafina's file, my hands shaking as I turned the brittle pages. It was filled with meticulous notes, all stamped with bold red letters. Unfit, delusional, paranoid. The language was cold, clinical, manipulated. It was clear that someone had gone to great lengths to paint Serafina as unstable. She wasn't delusional, Ingrid said, her voice filled with quiet anger. She was the sanest person in that entire place. The day before they committed her, she filed a formal complaint with the medical board. The very next day, she was labeled a threat to herself and others. I flipped to a photocopied report, handwritten, and signed with a familiar name, S. Valerius. It detailed unauthorized drug trials conducted on patients without their informed consent, all under the direction of Dr. Caldwell. Why hasn't this come out before? I asked, my voice filled with disbelief. Ingrid shook her head wearily. The Foundation's reach is long. They fund hospitals, universities, even political campaigns. If you try to go through official channels, through the system, they'll bury you. They'll make you disappear too. I'm not going to the system, I said, my voice hardening with determination. I carefully folded the report and slipped it into my jacket. I'm going to burn their house down from the outside. Ingrid hesitated for a moment, then reached into her own bag and pulled out a flash drive. She pressed it into my hand. These are internal memos, scans of patient logs, Serafina's reports, everything. If you're serious about this, you'll need it. I am, I replied, my voice firm. Then be smart, she urged, her eyes filled with concern. And don't come back here. As I slipped out through the maintenance door and back into the cold night, I felt a profound shift within me. I was no longer just a girl seeking answers about her past. I was a threat to a powerful and dangerous organization. And I wasn't scared. Not yet. I didn't return to the motel. I knew it wasn't safe to stay anywhere that could be easily traced. Instead, I spent the night in a corner booth of a 24-hour diner 2 towns away, nursing a single cup of coffee I could barely afford and staring at the flash drive in my palm as if it were a live wire. I had no laptop, only my phone. I couldn't risk connecting the drive to anything that could be tracked. By noon the next day, I had located a second-hand electronic shop. I paid cash for a beat-up Chromebook, its screen cracked in one corner and its keyboard sticky with the residue of countless spills. I took my purchase to a public library in a neighboring town, found a secluded table tucked behind a shelf of forgotten biographies, and plugged in the flash drive. It took nearly 3 agonizing minutes for the drive to load, the small indicator light on the Chromebook blinking incessantly. Then, finally, the folder names appeared on the screen. Patient logs, experimental treatment notes, Foundation memos, Dr. A. Caldwell, private, transfer records, S. Valerius. My throat went dry, my heart pounding in my chest as I navigated the files. I opened the patient logs first. Page after page of cold, clinical notes filled with coded references to sedation trials, regression therapy, behavioral compliance sessions. Some notes ended with the chilling phrase, subject transferred to long-term containment after noncompliance. There were no names, only numbers. Next were the Foundation memos. Many of them bore Robert's digital signature. Patient SV remains a reputational threat. Recommend continued confinement and status quo. Possible media exposure in 2008 flagged. Handled. Internal report by Ramirez suggests breach. Monitor and escalate. Kasia's name. They knew she was investigating. They watched her every move. They let her get close, and then they erased her. My hands trembled violently as I opened the folder labeled Dr. X. Caldwell, private. Inside were dozens of video files, each with no title, only a date. I clicked on one from 2005. A dimly lit room flickered onto the screen. A woman, strapped to a chair, her speech slurred and incoherent. A man's voice, off-screen, calm and chillingly polite, asked leading questions. Do you believe we're here to hurt you, Serafina? It was Caldwell's voice. No, she murmured, her eyes unfocused. You're helping me forget. I slammed the Chromebook lid shut, a wave of nausea washing over me. It wasn't therapy. It was programming, manipulation, a systematic attempt to erase her memories and control her mind. I knew then that I had to move quickly. I had to expose them before they could silence anyone else. I reached out to every independent journalist I could find, scouring the internet for contact information. I posted on anonymous Reddit threads, submitted tips to whistleblower leak forms. I even sent the full contents of the flash drive to a burner email address connected to a podcast known for its coverage of whistleblowers and corporate corruption. Most of my messages went unanswered, lost in the sea of online noise. But one name caught my eye: Evelyn Price, a former investigative reporter renowned for her tenacity and fearless pursuit of the truth. She had been fired years ago for her relentless investigation into unethical psychiatric treatment in state-run facilities. Rumor had it that she continued to dig, even operating off the grid. I sent her a message, my heart pounding with a desperate hope. I have proof of state-sanctioned experiments on women. I have names, videos, and I think a girl named Kasha Ramirez tried to reach you once. She disappeared. Please help me. I didn't expect a reply. I braced myself for another wave of silence, another dead end. But then, an hour later, a single message appeared in my inbox. Where are you? I've been waiting for this for 15 years. Evelyn Price didn't live in a city. She lived in a secluded cabin on the edge of a vast wilderness, 3 hours from the nearest town, hidden deep within a forest of towering pine trees. Her voice on the phone had been low and direct, devoid of any unnecessary details. No names. No license plates. Leave your phone in the glove compartment. I'll meet you outside. I followed her instructions meticulously. When I arrived at the cabin, she was already waiting for me on the porch, her figure silhouetted against the warm glow emanating from within. She was a woman in her early 50s, with sharp, intelligent eyes, wind-chapped skin, and an air of quiet determination. She didn't offer a welcoming smile or polite pleasantries. There was no time for social niceties. Inside, she moved with purpose and efficiency. She locked the door behind me, pulled out a dusty, well-worn laptop, and simply said, "Show me." I handed her the flash drive, my hands trembling slightly. She plugged it in, her expression remaining impassive as she scrolled through the folders. Only a slight intake of breath betrayed her reaction when she saw the name Kasha Ramirez. "She called me once," Evelyn murmured, her voice low and rough. "Told me she was scared. Told me she thought she was being followed. I offered to meet, but she disappeared before we could." She paused for a beat, her gaze piercing. "You're not just risking your life. You're stepping into a war. These people think they've already won." "I know," I replied, my voice firm. "But I'm not backing down." She opened one of the memos, her eyes scanning the text. Then, she nodded slowly. "These are real. The language, the headers, this is how the Foundation writes. You couldn't fake this." Then, she clicked on the video files, her jaw tightening as she watched, her expression unwavering. "This goes public. Someone burns," she said finally, her voice resolute. "But we have to be smart. One wrong move, and you disappear like Kasha, or worse, like Serafina, alive but buried." She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "We need to make this too big for them to contain. We go to trusted allies, former prosecutors, whistleblower networks. And when we drop it everywhere all at once." I nodded, my heart filled with a mixture of fear and fierce determination. Deep down, I knew we weren't just fighting for the truth. We were fighting for Serafina, for Kasha, and for what was left of my own stolen life. Evelyn moved with a speed and precision that belied her age. Within 24 hours, the flash drive had been duplicated 6 times, each copy mailed to a different individual across the country. Former prosecutors with a history of taking on powerful institutions, human rights lawyers known for their unwavering commitment to justice, 2 investigative podcasters with a massive online following, and an underground whistleblower platform specializing in exposing corporate malfeasance. Each person received a separate password to unlock the drive, delivered over encrypted phone calls. "This is how you kill a monster," Evelyn explained, her eyes gleaming with a fierce intensity. "You starve it of its secrecy." Meanwhile, she worked tirelessly through the night, drafting a comprehensive report to accompany the evidence, meticulously piecing together the timeline of events, connecting the dots, and exposing the Foundation's intricate web of deceit. I barely slept, my mind racing with a mixture of anxiety and anticipation. The stakes were incredibly high, but for the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of hope. The next morning, I woke to a voicemail on the burner phone Evelyn had provided. It was from him, Robert Brenner. His voice was calm, steady, the same controlled tone he always used, as if he was already calculating his next move. "Alana, I know what you've been doing. I want to talk. You owe me that." I stared at the phone, my stomach twisting into a knot of conflicting emotions. I didn't owe him anything. Evelyn looked up from her laptop, her expression wary. "Don't go." But I knew I had to. I needed to look him in the eye one last time, to confront him with the truth. We agreed to meet in a public place, an old, half-abandoned train station, its cavernous space filled with echoes of the past. There were security cameras, potential witnesses. I kept my distance, refusing to allow him to close the gap between us. He was dressed in his usual beige coat, his face adorned with his familiar fatherly smile, as if nothing had changed. "You've grown into a very clever girl," he said, his voice laced with a hint of condescension. "Don't," I snapped, my voice sharp. "Don't pretend you raised me out of love." His smile flickered, the mask momentarily slipping. "You think this was simple? You think I wanted this?" "No," I said, my voice unwavering. "I think you wanted control." He paused, his gaze hardening, then gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Everything you found, it's dangerous. Not just for me, but for you. For Serafina. If you release it, people will get hurt." "I know," I replied, my eyes locked on his. "They already have." He took a step closer, his voice softening, becoming almost pleading. "Alana, please. Think about your future. Think about Serafina's. This will destroy everything. I can help you. I can give you money, a new life, far away from here." "You already gave me a life," I retorted, my voice laced with bitterness. "A life built on lies, on stolen memories, on the suffering of others. I don't want your money. I want justice." He lunged forward, his hand outstretched, but I stepped back, my eyes flashing with defiance. "It's too late, Robert. The truth is out there. It's only a matter of time before it all comes crashing down." His face contorted with a mixture of rage and desperation. "You foolish girl. You don't understand the forces you're up against." But I did understand. I understood the power of truth, the resilience of the human spirit, and the unwavering determination that burned within me. I turned and walked away, leaving him standing there amidst the echoes of the past. As I rejoined Evelyn, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. The die had been cast. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Evelyn worked tirelessly, coordinating with our allies, preparing for the public release. The tension was palpable, but beneath it, there was a growing sense of hope. We were no longer alone. We had a network of people who believed in us, who were willing to fight for the truth. And then it happened. The story broke. It started with a single article in a small, independent online publication, then spread like wildfire. The podcast released a multi-part series detailing the evidence, interviewing former patients, and exposing the Foundation's crimes. The whistleblower platform released the full contents of the flash drive, allowing the world to see the truth for themselves. The reaction was swift and fierce. Protests erupted outside the Caldwell Wellness Foundation headquarters. News channels ran nonstop coverage. Politicians demanded investigations. The Foundation's carefully constructed facade crumbled, revealing the rot beneath. Robert Brenner was arrested, along with Dr. Alasdair Caldwell and several other key figures in the Foundation. The wheels of justice, though slow, began to turn. But the most important victory came in a quieter moment. Evelyn and I drove back to Oakhaven. This time, the atmosphere was different. The fear that had permeated the air was gone, replaced by a sense of cautious hope. Ingrid met us at the entrance, her eyes filled with tears of relief. "It's over," she whispered. "They can't hurt her anymore." We walked down the familiar hallway, but this time, the air felt lighter. Serafina sat by the window, her gaze clear, her posture strong. When she saw me, a genuine smile lit up her face. "Alana," she said, her voice filled with warmth. "You came back." I rushed to her side, embracing her tightly. "I told you I would." The reunion was bittersweet, filled with years of lost time and unspoken pain. But it was also a beginning, a chance to rebuild, to heal, to forge a new future together. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be trials, both literally and figuratively. But for the first time in my life, I felt a sense of belonging, a sense of purpose. I had found my mother, I had uncovered the truth, and I had helped bring down a powerful and corrupt organization. And as I held Serafina's hand, looking into her eyes, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, we would face them together. We had each other, and that was all that mattered.